We're back for the last segment of Apidays Interface, and I will be glad to present you our next speaker, who will talk about, again, AsyncAPI, but in a specific environment, about securely socializing Kafka topics with AsyncAPI and IBM event endpoint management. And for that, we're receiving Matthew Chirgwin, who is software engineer at IBM. Hello, Matthew. How are you doing? I'm
doing really well, thank you. And yes, welcome everyone. I hope you've had a great conference so far. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are in the world. I'm a software engineer working for IBM. I'm one of the technical leads working on event endpoint management. I'm here today to talk through how you can use AsyncAPI combined with event endpoint management to securely start to socialize Kafka topics like you would any other type of API. So with that, I'll kind of get into the talk today. And first, kind of a little bit of background and a little bit of context. So regardless of the industry and the application, there's been a huge drive and desire and demand for event-driven architectures and applications to address and solve and provide new experiences to customers and to drive new insights into existing business. There's a real desire to be able to react to events in real time, to build a history and a rapport with end users and provide them a really personalized and responsive customer experience. And as I say, potentially even leverage some of your existing systems with an event backbone to, for example, enable use cases like machine learning to perhaps identify things you wouldn't have spotted otherwise. So there's been this real explosion and interest in these systems. Technologies like Apache Kafka being rapidly deployed to provide these capabilities, which is fantastic. But as with all new and interesting technologies, there come some new and interesting challenges as well. A story that we've seen repeated quite a few times is even within the same business, different lines of business will go and start these initiatives to start capturing and making use of these events kind of in isolation of each other. There's all of this wonderful information being captured, but actually, they're kind of almost siloed off from one another, and that provides some challenges. So as an application developer, you've been asked to create an application which can make use of events, perhaps drive some delightful user experiences. But where's the information? Who do I contact to get access to it? And how do I understand some of the rules of engagement? And how can I quickly get up and running with these events? There's a gap there where they just simply don't have a place to locate this information or even find this information in the first place. There's also a challenge kind of on the other side of the house as well for the administrators of these systems. They are responsible for important things such as authentication and authorization, making sure that only the right users are able to access particular topics or sets of events as per their needs, to make sure that sensitive information, of course, isn't going out where it shouldn't be. But to do that, they're almost a bottleneck. They are constantly being bombarded with requests for access, and they have to maintain and manage that, making sure that the right people are informed and contacted when required. What that admin almost really wants to do is to describe their system like an API, describe the rules of engagement, describe some of the context so they don't have to keep repeating themselves. Now, up until fairly recently, there wasn't really a good way of doing that. But thankfully, in very recent times, something has come along to fit that exact need for event-driven systems. And as I'm sure most people who have been obviously attending the conference today will have heard, there's something called AsyncAPI. Just to go over it one more time, AsyncAPI is an open source community and initiative to come up with a specification for event-driven architectures. It's been around for 5 or so years from the very first version. And over time, it has been updated to be able to describe a whole range of event transports. Today you can describe a Kafka cluster, an MQQ manager, a JMS messaging system, all within one specification. And it was inspired by OpenAPI. There was desire, and this quote is from the AsyncAPI website, that the long-term goal of the initiative and the community is to provide a specification which means working with event-driven architectures is as easy as it is with REST APIs using OpenAPI as it is today. So as mentioned, it's been around for 5 years. The current major version is version 2. That came into being in 2019, and there's continued work on new versions. So version 3 is in progress at the moment. And while it's brilliant that we have this ability to document these systems, there are a few challenges still, however. So, compared to OpenAPI, it's relatively new. General awareness, while it is being adopted more widely, is still not quite at the same level as OpenAPI. And describing systems as asynchronous systems in this way is kind of new and a bit different as well. So there's a few barriers to entry there. Not only that, the spec is rapidly evolving, which is brilliant. There's lots of power and lots of ways to describe asynchronous systems, but keeping up with that syntax can be quite challenging. And even worse, potentially you could make a mistake or two in some of the subtleties of the syntax as well. So while async APIs are fantastic and the best way to describe an event-driven architecture, there are a few things to be aware of. And while that API definition solves some of the issues which I mentioned a moment ago, there still are a few extra steps which are required to solve all of the problems, such as a place to socialize this for API developers to discover these things, as well as managing access as and when required. Now, this is where event endpoint management comes in to solve those gaps. So what event endpoint management is it provides you the ability to author and manage and maintain an async API definition. It allows you to then push those definitions to a central developer portal where application developers can discover those definitions and get up to speed with them. Subsequently, they can sign up to make use of that application, and that all can then be managed by the administrator as well. So just to kind of go into each of those areas in detail. Well, first of which is, you need the ability to author and maintain. So we provide the ability in our API Manager UI to describe a Kafka cluster using AsyncAPI. And as you'll see in a moment, we've got a really nice wizard and editor tool. So you could, as someone who's never seen AsyncAPI before, get up to speed and up and running nice and quickly and easily. The benefit of that is that you end up with an async API definition which an application developer will be able to follow, understand, and be able to get value from nice and quickly and easily. Of course, the beauty and the benefit of a standard, of a definition like async API is you can then, for example, start to make use of and exploit tooling, so code generation, for example, so you can actually start to create some applications from just the definition on its own. And of course, as mentioned, async API, it's been inspired. It's been inspired by the OpenAPI definition. So some of the structure and the way that an application developer may already be familiar with from OpenAPI, they should be able to recognize that and understand the constructs and concepts there as well. So one thing I just want to mention as well, Async API is a really fantastic and vibrant community. It's one that IBM is a part of and has made contributions to. So we have, for example, made contributions around Kafka and security of Kafka, but also equally, we've also provided a full description and binding for IBM MQ. So you could completely describe an MQ queue manager and the semantics around that using the Async API definition as well. So we're trying to participate and contribute to the evolution of the specification as we go as well. So with all that, we've got our Async API definition, and while that's again a fantastic start and really good to have that written down and noted down, the next step of the story is to make that definition discoverable. What we provide here is our developer portal. So what this developer portal is the one-stop shop where you can discover from across the business all of the APIs that are available to you to make use of for your applications. It's all cataloged in one place, it's searchable, and the API definitions which have been created are presented to you in a nice friendly format, and you're able to consume and get value from those definitions quickly and easily. So an application developer can quickly identify something which may be of interest to their use case, and then they are then able to sign up to make use of that. So the developer portal goes hand in hand with something we call the event gateway. The event gateway is a point of enforcement. It applies policy and other controls to make sure that only authorized applications are able to connect to the gateway and subsequently connect to the real backend system. That is all managed in a self-service manner in the developer portal. And of course, with the event gateway being there as that point of enforcement, you're then able to understand which users are making use of APIs, track their use, interact with them, and even maintain and manage access to your actual real backend system. All of these elements kind of combine to provide that decoupled system that, by kind of definition, is more flexible and therefore less fragile. Not only that, you get the ability to perform interface versioning, so you can start to manage your life cycle and understand who's using, for example, which schemas and so on and so forth. And critically, the event gateway, it works at the protocol level. So, for example, in the case of Kafka, it literally works at the bits and bytes level of the Kafka protocol, meaning that any client can connect to it and think it's actually talking to the real Kafka broker. And as you'll see in a moment in the demo, you can even get error messages back and so on, which look like they've come from a Kafka broker. So with all that said and done, and kind of a little description of what event endpoint management and AsyncAPI can be used to achieve, what I'd like to do is kind of run through a scenario, a demo for you of how this can be applied. So for the sake of today, I'm going to run through a scenario for an airport operator, Acme Airports. We have two users who will be kind of following the stories of today. We have Chirgwin, who is a Kafka administrator. She's got a Kafka cluster which is full of events that she knows are valuable and useful, but doesn't quite know how to socialize those. And she has the issues of management and having to provide the information directly to application developers. And equally, we've got Andre, the application developer. He was working on an application to improve user experience at the airport, and he's interested to find out if there's any events that relate to weather. He's thinking that he could perhaps use that information to trigger an alert or push a notification that if a passenger was about to land at an airport and it's raining, make sure that you've got an umbrella handy, or perhaps you can go that extra mile and arrange for onwards transportation to a hotel or whatever would be appropriate. Those little details, if you will, which really kind of add to the end-to-end user experience, which only can be provided with events which obviously are happening in real time. So, with kind of that flavor, let's start the story here with Chirgwin. So Chirgwin in this case has an Apache Kafka cluster. This is provided by IBM Event Streams in this case, and we've got a set of topics here full of information which are ripe for use across the business. But the challenge is making sure that everyone is aware that this useful information is available. So of course she knows that we, in this case, some weather or temperature information, I should say, being captured, but no one perhaps is aware of that fact. In combination, the situation is kind of compounded that at the moment, because she's the administrator, whenever someone does want to make use of the cluster, she's the bottleneck. She's the one who has to provide things like credentials. She needs to make sure that they're created with the right levels of permission, and also managing which user has which credential, and have to track, for example, email addresses and so on in case of, for example, some maintenance or downtime. She'd also need to provide a lot of common information as well. So the Bootstrap server address, where to connect to, perhaps certificate information as well. All things which are repeat tedious tasks that ideally she wouldn't want to do. And it's more administration. What she really wants is that API definition to describe all of that, which she writes down once and application developers can discover as and when. So thankfully, with Event Endpoint Management, she can achieve exactly that. So in the API Manager UI, what we provide is a wizard flow to create an async API definition. And what we do is we've tailored this, so even if you've had no async API experience whatsoever, you're able to create a useful async API document. We call out our key fields, we call out things like summaries and descriptions, which are important to provide provide context for what this cluster is and the information it contains. But we also try and take the opportunity to introduce async API concepts and the mental model of async API as well, to try and educate and assist her in getting up to speed with async API as well. So examples here are servers. So the async API specification has servers to detail the physical servers which make up the system. Well, in the case of Kafka, that would be your Kafka brokers or your bootstrap address. So we've tied those together and introduced those as a pair. Of course, the same goes for a channel, which of course, in the case of Kafka, would map to a Kafka topic. The final thing that we call out as a part of this flow is security. So one of the challenges is creating lots and lots of credentials, and that has obviously some obvious overhead. What Event Endpoint Management allows you to do is to provide a single credential. In addition, you can provide a TLS certificate for transport security as well, that when the event gateway services a client, that one credential is used for all API traffic going forward. That means that the number of credentials that Chirgwin then has to manage is far fewer, and means that obviously that's a lot less work there to do. So having gone through this creation wizard, she will eventually end up with an AsyncAPI document, which is then maintainable and manageable through what we call the AsyncAPI editor. Again, here you get the full AsyncAPI spec available to you in a nice form view. In this case, you can explore what you've previously created and add any additional metadata or construct or detail that you feel is useful to make the application developer's experience as painless as possible. So we have a form view, but hopefully in time, as Chirgwin gets more familiar with AsyncAPI, she will become more of a power user. If you prefer, you can then go through and create and manage AsyncAPI in the raw YAML if you so wish as well. So in short, Chirgwin has been able to capture her Kafka cluster and some of her topics in AsyncAPI now, and that's great. We've got the definition. What we now need to do is socialize. So what we have in Event Endpoint Management is this construct of products. Products are groupings of like APIs which are published as one unit. This provides you the ability to version these things, as well as provide additional metadata about what the product contains. And it also allows you the opportunity to mix styles of APIs. So you could, for example, have synchronous APIs defined in OpenAPI and async APIs side by side. The publishing process, once you have your product completed, is pretty trivial as well. As you can see, another little wizard flow here. You choose your publishing target. And just like that, that API definition that you've created has been now pushed to the central developer portal, has been pushed to an event gateway instance, already meaning that application developers can now discover and start to make use of the Kafka cluster of topics that you've just described. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So here we are in our developer portal. We're now assuming the role of Andre, and having come to this UI, we're looking for weather information. But of course, you have a little browse and you see something which is kind of interesting. So, for instance, perhaps some flight landing information. Hadn't thought about perhaps capturing some of that as part of his app, but he now knows that we've got some synchronous and asynchronous APIs available to us potentially for his application. But having seen that there's a few bundles here that he might be interested in making use of, he spots a weather product and a weather API. And what he can do in this portal is start to explore this API definition. And what he will actually start to see and review is actually the AsyncAPI document that Chirgwin has authored. So we have a nice, as an akin to the editor, for example, view of that AsyncAPI document. So if he's not familiar, then he can obviously still get some value from this. If he is has come across AsyncAPI, perhaps he has some tooling locally to generate some code, well, he can still get that AsyncAPI definition if he so likes. But you can also, in this UI, generate code snippets, see schema information, and if it's provided, even see some example payloads, all very quickly and easily. See if this particular API, this particular topic, is a good fit for what he's looking to implement. Having identified that this is indeed a good fit, he can go through this very quick sign-up process, all within the developer portal. He associates the application he's working with the API, and with just a few clicks, he's now signed up and ready to use it. Chirgwin has not had to be involved whatsoever. He's now got his application associated, and if he then returns to the code snippet view, as you'll see in a moment, that actually will be updated with his application's details, his credentials, for example, which means he will literally be able to take a code snippet in whichever language he chooses, and potentially even grab some of the dependency information, for example, and he can get up and running really quickly. So just to show an example of that, we'll just skip ahead slightly here. So here we have his IDE of choice. He's grabbed a Node.js snippet in this instance, and he can literally run this little application quickly and easily. This is the application talking to the event gateway piece. His credentials are confirmed. It's confirmed that he has access to the backend system. And that real Kafka cluster that Siobhan has described is now being accessed, and the events that that topic contains are now being served to him through the event gateway. So, we've very quickly gone from Siobhan describing this system for the very first time, Andre discovering it, signing up, and he's now got this data to hand. And he's able to then obviously work with it, experiment with it, and integrate it and achieve his business objective. Now, this is kind of the day one side of things. There's still a little bit of management that Siobhan may be interested in doing. So again, in the API manager, she'll be able to see which users, which applications have signed up to use the various products. So here we get a view of all of the applications, for example, that are using some of the products. And from here, she could start sending emails. She could start to manage credentials. And in this case, she's removed access from that particular application to the product. And Andre's application will continue to work up until the point that obviously that removal of access is processed. And as you can see here, we've got an error stack. And because the event gateway is working at that protocol level, we're effectively sending back a response saying, well, unfortunately, your username and password, your credentials for your application are no longer valid. So your application can then, of course, process that as it would do a normal event or access issue here, and proceed as appropriate. So just to sum up, we started with Siobhan with her cluster, with some topics and some helpful information. She wants to be able to socialize this as an API to avoid some of the bottlenecking and issues that she's been encountering. With the addition of event endpoint management, she has 3 components available to her to help enable that. She can describe her cluster and the topics in the API manager. She can then publish that to the developer portal and event gateway, meaning that we now have a description in the developer portal of this cluster that allows Andre, with his application, to be able to sign up to make use of it. And without Siobhan needing to get involved, traffic can then flow from the application via the event gateway and that point of enforcement to the actual cluster itself. This is a little bit of a simple example, of course. This does indeed scale quite nicely. So if you added, for example, another cluster, well, that event gateway can still cover that additional cluster and its topics as well. So Andre's application could then start to consume multiple topics from multiple clusters, but the event gateway is acting as that layer of abstraction. And finally, as mentioned, you can mix synchronous and asynchronous APIs in event endpoint management as well. With the API gateway being installed and configured, that application again can be extended to make use and sign up to RESTful APIs if that's the best fit for the use case. So finally, just to wrap up, event-driven systems are becoming more and more prevalent to address new and interesting business use cases to be more reactive and deliver new and interesting customer engagements and stories. Application developers are desperately looking to provide that capability, but they're lacking the critical information of what information is available and how to get access to these systems. Equally, admins are trying to share these systems but don't have a good way of doing that. AsyncAPI has come along and has really bridged that gap. And with the addition of event endpoint management, we allow you to quickly and easily create and maintain async APIs. And with the combination of the developer portal and event gateway, you can then securely socialize those and provide self-service access to Apache Kafka, along with potentially synchronous APIs as well. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time and your attention today. And with that, I'll wrap up the talk. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Ju. We have 1 minute for just one question. But again, the thing is, let's say, for a company who didn't yet invest into Kafka, and like how long is the learning curve according to your experience?
Yeah, so Kafka obviously is a very complicated. There's a lot of power there. The creation wizard, for example, that I've shown, and the editor there, we've tried to really simplify and bring forward the Kafka terminology, the core Kafka terminology, to the fore. and to help guide, and we've got documentation to go with that as well, and explain some of the concepts of Kafka and how those relate to the async API. So certainly in, for example, workshops and demos we've had with customers in the past, they've been pretty quickly and easily able to go from a Kafka cluster and a topic to a working end-to-end system, as shown here, within an hour. So yeah, it certainly has been helpful to get people up and running. But this is a new and interesting space. It's evolving all the time, and there's plenty of new and interesting use cases out there, which we'll look to help with going forward.
Yep. Thank you very much. I think, yeah, it really explained how people, for people who are not ready yet, but who wants to jump in to see all the opportunities. Now, Async API is a lot more stable, a lot of tooling. So yeah, I think, yeah, we can really make the match. And then at least they'll know that with IBM, they can do it directly.
Absolutely right.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Enjoy your night.